When Helen Bennett burst into her daughter's house without knocking, something she hadn't done in 40 years, she clutched a worn envelope in her hand. It was a letter written by her own mother just a week before she died, and it was addressed not to Helen, but to her granddaughter. "Did you read this?" Helen gasped, jabbing the envelope toward Laura's face. "You read it and said nothing?" Laura stood at the stove, wooden spoon in hand. Slowly, she set it down on the countertop. Her fingers had gone white from tension. The kitchen smelled of thyme and roast chicken, the dinner she'd been preparing for her grandchildren. But now something far heavier hung in the air, decades of buried resentment and a truth someone had finally dared to uncover. "Yes, Mom," she said quietly. "I read it." Helen staggered and leaned against the doorframe as if struck in the chest. Outside, leaves rustled in the wind. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. An ordinary autumn evening in an Ohio suburb. Nothing hinted at the storm, but the storm had already begun, inside their family home, inside their hearts. Helen had always believed herself to be the perfect mother. She'd worked as a nurse for 30 years, raised Laura alone after her husband walked out, scrimped and saved so her daughter could go to college and later, grad school. She'd given everything, every spare minute, every dollar, every ounce of patience. And what had she gotten in return? Last Christmas, Laura hadn't invited her. Said the kids were sick. But Helen had seen the photos on Instagram, smiling grandchildren in brand new sweaters, neighbors gathered around a festive table, and no seat for Grandma. That was the first time Helen felt erased from her own family's life. But she stayed silent. Pride wouldn't let her beg. Then, a month ago, sorting through an old trunk in the garage, she found a box of her mother Margaret's belongings. Among faded photographs and recipes for oatmeal cookies lay a letter. Addressed to Laura. Marked, "Open after my death." Helen opened it and read the words that shattered everything she'd ever believed. Margaret had written, "Laura, my dear, I'm writing this knowing Helen will never forgive me for telling the truth. But you deserve to know. That year you were 12, when you fell off your bike and broke your collarbone, it wasn't an accident. You were frightened because you'd just seen your mother hurl your favorite doll, Molly, against the wall. She'd screamed at you over a bad math grade. You burst into tears and ran outside. You didn't fall, you fled. And then you fell. Helen didn't mean to hurt you. She was desperate. Your father had just left, and she was terrified you wouldn't become the successful woman she dreamed you'd be. But fear turned to anger, and anger became a wound you've carried ever since. I'm sorry I stayed silent then. I thought time would heal everything. But time doesn't heal when the truth stays locked away. You love your mother, and she loves you. But love without honesty is an empty house with a pretty facade. Forgive us both. And maybe one day, forgive yourself for carrying this fear of never being good enough." Helen had reread those lines dozens of times. Each time it felt like a punch to the gut. She remembered that day. Remembered her shouting. Remembered standing in the hospital, holding her daughter's arm in a cast, weeping. But she'd convinced herself it was stress. I'll never do it again. And she never had, not the yelling. But she'd never apologized either. Not once. And Laura had stayed silent. All these years. Why didn't you tell me? Helen's voice trembled, not with rage now, but with raw pain. Laura looked down, walked to the fridge as if searching for something that wasn't there, then closed it again and turned. Because you never asked, Mom. You always wanted everything to look perfect. For me to be the good girl, the perfect wife, the successful mom. But I just wanted you to see, I was scared. That it hurt. But you weren't looking. You were only watching the image. Helen sank into a kitchen chair. Her shoulders slumped, as if someone had finally lifted the armor she'd worn her whole life. I thought, she whispered, I thought I was protecting you. From failure. From pain. From a world that wounds. But you wounded me yourself, Laura said softly. You believed strength was control. But real strength is vulnerability. It's saying, I'm sorry. I was wrong. That night, they didn't finish dinner. The grandchildren arrived later, carrying Grandma's apple pie, baked from Margaret's old recipe. The kids didn't sense the tension. They were just happy to see Grandma and Mom sitting at the same table for the first time in months. Later, after the children went to bed, Helen and Laura sat on the porch wrapped in blankets. Moonlight shimmered on the pond behind the house. "I'm afraid," Helen admitted. "Afraid it's too late to fix what's broken between us." "It's never too late, Mom," Laura said. "We can start over. Not as the perfect mother and perfect daughter. Just as us." Helen nodded. A tear slid down her cheek. "I'm so proud of you, Laura. You're better than I ever was. You know how to forgive." "No, Mom. I'm just tired of carrying this pain." The next morning, Helen didn't go home. She stayed. She helped Laura get the kids ready for school, brewed coffee in the old pot, the one Laura had kept on the top shelf because Grandma's coffee is too strong. But today, Laura asked for her cup just the same. "I want to feel as awake as you," she said with a smile. That afternoon, they visited the cemetery together. At Margaret's grave, Helen laid a bouquet of white roses. Laura placed a small stone engraved with the word, "Thank you." "She knew we'd find that letter," Laura said. "She believed we'd make it through." "She believed in us more than we believed in ourselves," Helen replied. 2 weeks passed. Helen was still living with Laura, not because she couldn't go home, but because she didn't want to. Every morning, they drank coffee together. They talked about the kids' school, weekend plans, even politics, carefully but honestly. One day, Laura found an old photo album in the closet. Inside was a picture she'd never seen. 3-year-old Laura perched on Helen's shoulders, both laughing, a carnival with balloons and popcorn behind them. "We were happy," Laura whispered. "We can be again," Helen said. The conflicts didn't vanish overnight. They still argued about parenting, money, even how to clean the oven. But now their disagreements didn't spiral into silent wars. Now they could say, "That hurt me," or "I disagree, but I hear you." One evening, after the kids were asleep, Laura wrote her own letter, not to her mother, but to her 15-year-old daughter, Emily. "Sweetheart, if you ever read this, know this. I'm not perfect. I make mistakes. I yell when I'm exhausted. I'm scared I won't be enough. But I always love you. And if I ever hurt you, forgive me. Or bring me this letter. I promise, I'll listen. Not just as your mom, but as someone who's still learning to be better." She placed the letter in the dresser drawer, next to the one her grandmother had written. A year later, on Helen's birthday, the whole family gathered at Laura's house. Even cousins from Florida came. Around the table, they laughed, shared old stories, and no longer avoided the pain those stories hid. When Helen raised her glass, the room fell silent. "I used to think being a good mother meant being flawless," she said. "But now I know, being a good mother means being honest. Even when it hurts." Laura smiled. Her eyes sparkled. And in that moment, amid laughter, the scent of pie, and a silence full of understanding, they both knew their story was only just beginning.